always glad to see you as we introduce you to our neighbors. It's our community, you know. Today, we have a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army, Jim Lunsford. But, you know, as all of us who retire, we find something to do.
That's true.
Yes. So Jim is a war game person. He creates them, he plays them, and he teaches about them. Is that fair to say?
It sure is.
And he owns a company called Decisive Point, which I think is kind of interesting in and of itself, because the decisive point in any war game is when you have to do something.
That's correct, yes, absolutely. And that's why we named the company with that title.
I think that was brilliant on my part, was it not? I think so. That's really good. What could you define? You know, people think about war games and they think about, well, are we going to slit their throat, blow them out of the air, or do something? You know, there are all these robot type people. That's not what we're talking about here. No. So define your Decisive Point war game.
Well, our games are not what a lot of people think when they think about war games today. Most people, when they think of war games, think of the first-person games you see on PlayStation and Xbox, where you're actually shooting a weapon or whatever. And those are games that are designed for entertainment. Our games are specifically designed to allow leaders a chance to practice the cognitive skills associated with their task in the military.
So, but what you're really doing, I'm not going to let you go on that, because I think you're doing even more than that. I think when you say cognitive skills, I think you're teaching people to make decisions. You're teaching people to look ahead. You're teaching them higher level thinking, and sometimes creativity.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, all of those things come into play, because, see, I played war game with him. I've never shot a gun. I don't have a gun. I have no intent of buying a gun. So he says, let's play a war game. So I said, cool.
And you did a good job, too. Yeah,
I thought so too, because I have to tell you that I'm careful not to let anybody sneak up behind me, and I also have to know how far my bullet is going to go so I can stay as far away as possible.
That's correct.
and achieve the goal. So I think what we're talking about, as we look at these games as we go along, we're talking about troop movements.
Correct.
Yes. We're talking about logistics.
Absolutely.
Yes. We're talking about intelligence.
Yes.
Now, intelligence is not necessarily what's in your brains, but intelligence is that which...
Well, it's really collecting information about your opponent and processing it so you can make a determination of what your opponent's going to try to do and how do you get ahead of him in terms of making decisions. That's really the goal. Well,
you know, I remember when I like Patton. He was a little different, but I do like George Patton. Even if he did think he was Alexander the Great, that's okay. But he had great admiration for Erwin Rommel, as do I. And I think Erwin Rommel was probably, and I'm sure you may disagree, was one of the finest military persons in World War II.
Absolutely.
And so Patton read everything he could, because he faced Rommel in the desert, in the tank warfare that was in the African desert. So he read everything he could about Rommel, because intelligence was very important. And to find out how Rommel's mind worked was also very important.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I think it's kind
And Rommel had written a book in World War I about his experience in World War I, and Patton had read that as well.
Yeah. And so I thought that was, and also fire support. Now talk about fire support.
Okay. Well,
we don't all know what that is.
It's a very broad topic, but,
yes.
but essentially the goal is to mass as many of your fires as possible at the decisive point on the battlefield. And by doing that, you can demoralize the enemy, you can cause casualties, and hopefully you can get them to capitulate. So it's all about kind of getting some synergy and also synchronizing things so that they all happen at the right place, the right time, and with the highest level of intensity possible.
Well, and you know, when we played this war game, I had 13 rifles and 2 machine guns.
Yes.
So we don't want to leave anybody behind, and we have to figure out how to use that fire support always to the optimum to get the platoons. I think I had 5 platoons tonight.
You had one platoon, but you had 3 rifle squads and 2 machine gun teams.
See, I'm not an Army person, so I get mixed up exactly. But I know I had 15 men. That I know. So, and I know I had 13 rifles, and I know I had 2 machine guns. So that was, to me, important. So I needed to get all of those people through, not get shot in the rear end, and go forward and keep them where they needed to be, and move them all at the right time. That's important, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, when you went through the process, you know, you were correctly analyzing the situation. You were asking questions about capabilities like how far does this weapon fire, when it's most effective. And so by going through that process, you know, you obviously are a neophyte, just trying for the very first time.
I'm just trying to survive here.
Well, I know, but you were channeling Rommel and Patton at the same time. But
where are you when I need you?
but the types of questions that you were asking and the way you were doing things is really what the game is designed to do. So for instance, the game you were using is actually used at West Point. That's what the cadets used during their 4 years of training at West Point. And most cadets have no more knowledge of military than what you had walking into that experience. Very limited.
We talked about, in playing these games, sometimes leaders do show up.
Absolutely.
Now, the problem with that is if they're really young, is that they've never been in battle. Do these war games give them some sort of a taste of what they may face?
Well, some elements, obviously things like fear, you're not going to see that in the game, obviously, but
that's what keeps you going.
But in terms of, you know, looking at a complex problem and trying to dissect that into pieces where you can understand all the various variables, and, you know, how do you bring those variables together and create a solution that works. That, again, that's what it's all about. I mean, kind of the thrust of this is that most of the things we teach are always theory, and until someone actually has a chance to see the theory applied or apply it themselves, they really have no understanding of all the different variables and how you're supposed to assemble them together to be successful. So the game allows them to do it in a very benign environment where no one gets hurt, nothing gets damaged, and they can make as many mistakes as they want.
Well, and I think another thing it does teach them is that there are a lot of moving parts to moving men.
Absolutely.
And women, men
Absolutely.
and women. And I think sometimes, it's just like I always thought I could be a first-class football coach, because all you need to know is to grab the ball and run like you know what. Well, you do need to know more than that. You need to know that there are numbers of moving parts, and you have to know what you need to bring up and leave behind, bring up. You're constantly making the importances fade and come up, fade and come up.
Right.
So I think that the other thing is, you know, we were talking about this, and some of these young lieutenants have never been in battle, and they are leading men in battle, men and women who are battle-seasoned people. They have to know how to generate the trust in these men and women that have been in battle and are not really too keen on exposing themselves to getting shot.
Right.
So that's important.
Well, fortunately, when you're a young leader like that, you do have seasoned people there that underneath you, for instance, your platoon sergeant in this case, who will advise you. I mean, they're the ones that keep you straight and keep your bales moving. But the idea of the game is that they can kind of learn the mental skills necessary to be a good tactician.
Well, you know, Eisenhower said, and I thought this was really good, he said, the problem in defense is how far you can go without destroying from within what you're trying to defend from without. And I think that there is something to be said for that.
Absolutely.
I think when you play, you've just come back from West Point, and when you play these games with these young cadets, can you tell who's going to be a good leader?
That's a difficult question. You certainly get a quick appreciation as to who has some pretty good problem-solving skills and analytical skills, and you can readily see if someone is prior service, meaning they've had experience as an enlisted soldier prior to going to West Point. You can readily see those. They come up very quickly because they immediately know to do certain things. That experience is shown as soon as you start playing the game.
Yeah, but I think one thing the games don't take into consideration is fear and courage.
No.
And I think foolhardiness also comes into play there a little bit too. But fear and courage often are what make a good leader.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, but that's one way you can really test that.
But this is the jumping off place. This really can tell you a lot. And we're going to look at some of these games in a minute, but I want to talk about how, when you create war games, war has changed over the centuries.
Dramatically.
And,
yes.
and do you take into consideration historical battles?
Absolutely. We've created a couple games that simulated historical battles. They're easier to do because with hindsight and historical data, you can go back and pick things apart a lot easier than trying to look at things that either happen today or even more challenging in the future. At one time, we were working for the Air Force to build a game on how to use UAVs in the future.
I don't know what UAVs are.
Unmanned aerial vehicles.
Okay.
I'm sorry. And so, there's great unknown. So we were having to make a whole series of assumptions as to the capabilities that they might have and how people might want to use them. So, historical is pretty easy. Contemporary is challenging. Futuristic is really, that's where you're really kind of stretching it pretty far.
It certainly is. Well, let's play. Let's
okay.
talk about some of these war games and see how they work. Because I am not, as you know, I'm not very good at this, but I found the whole thing absolutely fascinating. So, Elusive Victory is one of the first ones that we're going to look at, and you call that a stability operations game. What does that mean?
Well, stability operations are what you see currently going on currently right now in Afghanistan. So essentially, it's after most ground operations have been completed, you go into trying to stabilize the area. So when you look at this particular screen, you can see there's a town here, and the map's actually showing you, or the screen's actually showing you in the graphical user interface, all the little squares are different assets such as power, transportation systems.
What is the orange?
The orange?
Yeah, those little, it looks like a chart of the elements. Is that what shows you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those are all different, really, systems of a
That's what I have to work with.
Absolutely. So you're kind of the mayor of the town. You're trying to make sure you bring back things like electricity, water, transportation systems, because until you get those things resurrected or repaired, you're not able to really stabilize, a location.
So if we go back to that just a minute, we can talk about what happened in Iraq, because we had to we're trying to put it back together. So we had, when we go in, we need to know that, but when we put it back together, we need to know that as well.
Absolutely. And this game's really about rebuilding a nation.
Now there's a pink square around, or a bright red square. What is that?
I'm not sure which one's the bright red square. I mean, there's a number of red things. But you tell me
it's
where it
in
says,
the map.
It's in the map?
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's actually showing you the status of that particular unit. Red means they're having significant problems.
So are we trying to bail them out?
In this particular case, it shows you that units having a hard time, that in terms of manpower and ammunition, things like that, they're having problems. You need to actually replace them.
If I play this game, what is my goal?
Your goal essentially is to, when you look at the graphical user interface on the left, all the little circles, little buttons that are either red, yellow, or green, your goal is to get them up to, many of them as possible, to green. And what you're doing at the same time, though, is you're having to work with the local population, identify the bad guys who are obviously hiding. You're trying to eliminate them or restrict them to areas where they can't do any more damage. So you're trying to secure the area too.
I'll say, because we always go back to moving the troops and to the logistics and the intelligence and the fire support. That's really what we always go back to. How do we manage all that to get where we're going, and how do we help those people or those platoons or the groups of persons that are having a hard time?
Yes.
So, God, there's a lot to think about here.
Absolutely.
And as these folks play this game, we can watch them play the game, and they look at it. Is this the instructor?
This is a student who's actually doing an update briefing for the rest of the group. So he's showing the current situation within the game, and he's kind of talking through his portion of, here's, from my perspective, it could be intelligence, it could be civil affairs. He's kind of giving everybody else an update on the situation.
But the information that he is passing along was given to him by the creator of that game.
Well, part of it was given to him by the game, and part of it maybe his own analysis.
I see.
He has other information. And these other pictures, again, showing students doing presentations on the current situation.
Well, see, what I find kind of interesting with these games, that it's part technology and part human.
Absolutely.
Now, is that important? The human element in there is...
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, it's about
Are they
training.
Constructed to include a human element? That's really what I'm
Are we
getting.
talking about like a simulated human element?
Well, no, I'm talking about this man that's giving an update.
Yes. I mean, end of the day, the games we primarily design are for training people and educating people. So understanding, who they are, what their background is, what's the educational goals in this particular case, how much time we have to work with them in a classroom, what are the principal things we want them to gain from this experience that basically helps them meet their learning objectives.
But the human person is constantly giving them an update.
Oh, absolutely.
See, and
yeah,
so
that's true.
Yeah, so that's really what I'm finding, because in battle there is a human person, whether it's on earphones or standing there as the platoon leader or the general or the whoever's out there, that is constantly updating where are we going, what are we doing. Exchange of information is really important.
Absolutely, and most of our games really are designed to be used in an environment where there's a team presence, so they're actually working on their individual skills as part of a bigger team.
Well, and let's pull out that word, team, because nothing is gained if they don't learn to work as a team.
That's correct.
So that's another thing that these games do teach, because often they do work as a team when they play the game, do they not?
Well, most of the time they do. They work as a team. And we all know you can have a team, but a lot of team comes from practice, getting to understand each other and what different skills are and how you work with each other to get produce the best product or make the best decision possible.
Well, and learning the team is important, because the teams change in the Army.
Absolutely, all the time.
All the time. So, okay, as we proceed through this game now, we are, everybody has a screen in front of them, and they're constantly feeding information that they're asked for as we move along through this battle.
Yeah, the games vary. This one, a number of our games, this one included, are not just played, a couple people may be playing the game, but a lot of the data is actually being sent to a real-world Army command and control system. In other words, a computer designed to essentially it's replaced the paper maps that you have in command posts. Everything's done on computer screens now. So the data actually goes into these systems, so that most of the people are actually looking at their actual command and control system.
Well, in the old war games, they're board games.
That's true. Things have changed. Everything's become electronic now.
Yeah, yeah. But there are other games that you have that the goals are different, and,
sure.
and we can talk about those too. Future Force is one of them.
Future Force is a different game in that it's different when people think of a war game. Future Force was designed so that students, when they take a class on the Army budget process and a related topic called force management, which means how the Army creates forces, sustains forces over the lifespan of a kind of an organization, maybe 10, 12 years. So the goal of this game is you're kind of chief of staff of the Army and his staff, and your goal is to visualize, who
I'm
we're
moving
face.
up in the world now.
There you go, exactly.
Yes.
10 years from now, 15 years from now, what's the threat going to look like, and how do we build a proper force to meet that threat, and then get it in the right geographical region based on the threats as they evolve.
Well, see, that's really very germane to today's Army that is being cut back.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And the reason this is good, when I was a student going through the Army budget process, I cannot remember anything about it. I mean, it was a very dull subject. And the professor who came up with this idea and really designed the initial game.
They pay you to make it more interesting, Jim.
I mean, I wish I'd gone through the class when something like this was available. I would probably have retained it a lot longer.
That's right. Well, and I noticed too that when we looked at that, there's a lot of information on that slide, because color is very important
sure.
in these games.
Yes.
What does the green tell me?
Well, the green really shows you in this case what's actually available. So when you look at the two areas, the students are playing both either purple or orange side. And they can play against each other. And the green shows the forces currently available in your country that can be deployed. The yellow are ones that are currently being built and trained, and the gray are kind of units that you just started building. So it takes sometimes 3 to 5 years once you start building a unit before you can actually send it overseas to accomplish tasks.
That makes you think ahead.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I think that's kind of a different kind of a game.
Yes.
Others that you have designed are all for a little bit different goals in mind.
Absolutely.
And I think decisive action is another one that you did. And what is the goal here? If I'm going to do well at this game, what do I need to do?
Well, decisive action is really the biggest game that we have in terms of its use and complexity. And
I like the expressions on their faces. They are truly concentrating.
Yeah,
it's
they're very
important to
serious.
them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And essentially it's used during a week-long exercise at the Army Command and General Staff College. It replaced a large system major Army system about 10 years ago, and used to have about 100 and some contractors that were hired to support running that big computer simulation.
Well, and those men that you see are the cream of the crop
Right.
that have been invited to go to the Command and General Staff College.
Absolutely.
So how they perform is extremely important to them.
Oh yes, absolutely. And this is the big capstone exercise they call it. It's the big exercise they have before they graduate from the Command and General Staff College.
So they have to play this game.
Absolutely. But now they do it themselves. They don't have contractors come in. They just
Right.
have a student who plays it, and I mean, well, a number of them play it, but
But they're getting watched. I mean, they're not just going to have fun here.
Oh, no, 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 no. I mean, there may be some periods of enjoyment, but it's a very
They're
challenging.
sort of small and
They're being evaluated. I mean, all of them are hard-charging professionals, type
the
A's
enjoyment
usually.
is way down on the list.
That's right. Very highly competitive group of people. They want to do well.
Yeah, they do. Well, what do I have to do to win this game or to do well?
Well, I mean, you essentially have to understand division-level operations. Division, when you think
Well, you're
of...
showing me a map, a
Right.
terrain map.
Okay.
So I got to move somewhere.
Well, they're given a mission, and they have to fight their opponent, and what they have to be skilled at are what are called the war-fighting functions, things like we talked about partially intelligence, logistics, fires, things like that. So you have to understand each of those components.
But they're given information when they start that game.
That is correct.
So
they actually, they go
We're
through
not flying blind here.
Oh, no, 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 no. They go through a detailed planning process. They're given, as if they were actually a real division staff, the necessary planning documents and guidance so they can build a division plan. They then present that plan to an instructor, and then they fight the plan, and as they fight, problems occur and they have to adjust.
Well, see, I think it's important to make the point that they don't go out there just blind. They have a staff meeting first, or something that's sort of analogous to a staff
Absolutely.
meeting, because they're given information, and they're given information about their surroundings and about, you know, and where we're going here. I mean,
Yes, they produce a series of very detailed...
you know what Yogi Berra says, any road will take you there if you don't know where you're going. So we don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, they don't choose that approach. They have a very structured, detailed
That's right.
planning process. They
See.
produce a lot of products. It's,
And that's what's important. you see.
absolutely.
So, okay, decisive action is a really heavy-duty game.
Yes. It's kind of our flagship game, I guess I would call it. It's been
How long
around
does
for
it
about
take
11
to
years.
play?
Well, they play it over a period of about 4 or 5 days.
Do
and
they?
They play it all day.
Boy, you're just worn slick by the time you get through there.
Well, that's why it's a capstone exercise. When they're done with that, they pretty much are almost ready to
They
graduate.
say, I'm ready to go home
Exactly.
now. Okay, so gaming is not accepted equally by all members of the military.
No, no.
Why not? I don't understand.
I think a lot of it's just plain ignorance. I mean, you know, the Army's had simulations for a long time, and you know, people's understanding of simulations are they're used for certain things. They have to pass a set of evaluations for them to become approved. And you know, a game by its very nature is a very simple. The models are simple. I tell people they're good enough just for, you know, the types of decisions you want to make. They're not something that's being designed to actually, let's say, you know, evaluate a future combat system or actually look at a real battle plan and go, will this thing work or not? I mean, it's just the
Well, you're literally
accuracy.
slogging along here.
Absolutely. I
I
mean,
mean,
but ideas have something very simple and easy to use, something that people can readily understand how to use and then practice the skill in the classroom. The large Army simulations are very detailed, very complicated. You're not going to do that in a classroom.
No. Well, and you know, all of the games that we played, a game that was kind of, they're not all Army simulations. Some
No.
of them are, we played a game, I think it was about Lewis and Clark.
That is correct.
And you asked me, I had some choices to make. I could either go hunt, we were in the middle of a swamp here, and I thought, I want to get my little person out of this mess. So you asked me if I wanted to go hunting because we were short of food. Yeah, the whole panoply of choices here.
Yes.
And so I said, well, if we're short of food, we need to hunt. Then if we did find some, I got some points, by the way. By the way, I did get some points for going hunting. And so then you said to me, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to get out of here. So I got a point or two for that, by the way, because I didn't want to stay in the swamp with all the diseases and the mosquitoes and all like that. So we moved out of the river, and I knew at the beginning that one of the goals was to meet the Indians. So I could either go this way, or this way, and it told me on the game that the Indians were at the top. So there are lots of different kinds of games here.
Absolutely. And I would tell you the future, I think most education in the future will be done using games. Very simple, easy games that focus on
Why do
learning.
you think that?
Because, you know, I think it's when it's done properly, when it's designed properly, and it's used properly by a really talented teacher, I think it provides really great experiential learning.
Okay, let's pull out another thread here, talented teacher.
Absolutely. And that's really the linchpin. I tell people no matter how good of a game we ever build, it's less than half the solution. It's always about the teacher. Great teachers do great things anyway.
But they have to know their stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is not, no one should ever see this as a replacement for a teacher. I mean, we still need great teachers more than ever.
What kind of a person makes a really good teacher in this area? A historian, a military historian, a military buff? Who are we looking for?
Well, you know, again, considering it could be any number of topics, the thing that I found is the people that do best are people that are very self-confident. They're very flexible themselves. One of the things when you have a game and you're using it for a classroom, students make decisions and the game produces outcomes. It's not always in line with what the teacher expects. Now, it may be something you're going to teach 2 weeks from now, but it may not be what you plan on teaching today. So if you capitalize on the moment now and embrace it and teach maybe, again, something 2 weeks that you had scheduled 2 weeks from now, it produces a great training or learning environment.
Well, you know, I'm an old school teacher, and I always used to tell the children, as you travel on through life, brother, whatever be your goal, keep your eye upon the donut, not upon the hole. So the goal is really, you got to keep that at the front of your mind here.
Exactly.
Where are you going? And I think a good instructor always is able to do that. And they come from many walks of life, really, they do. So what are you where are you going next with your gaming?
Well, should I talk about?
Sure.
We're working with the National World War I Museum to
Yes.
produce a game that will help people understand World War I and make the lessons from World War I relevant to people today. And we want the game to be something that, you know, groups of people can come to the museum and experience making decision assessments that the historical leaders of that day did.
You know, I remember I looked at one of the old board games from World War I, and the armies were really very close together. They didn't have a whole lot of, and one of them couldn't back up because if they backed up, they would be in a country that had not declared war, so you can't enter that country. The other one, there were some topographical problems in back of them.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? I mean, the decision comes down to, shall you cut and run? Shall you go to the sides? Shall you charge forward? I remember one of the battles in World War II in Russia, was it Stalingrad, the Battle of Stalingrad? They were only about 50 feet away from each other, and they were firing right in this is really had happened, firing in everybody's face. You know, that's not a real good place to be. So what do? So the Wargaming Center that Jim is working on to establish at the National World War I Museum talks about the lessons of World War I, the battles fought, and the policy made. You know, when we talk about gaming, we cannot forget policy, because policy that is made as a result of wars haunts us often forever. The Middle East looks like it does because of the policy that was made in World War I. Eastern Europe, much of it looks like it does because of the policies. So we want to talk about those kind of games too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Jim, you got your future cut out for you.
I'm looking forward to it.
I think it's just fascinating because, you know, there are lots of things common to war. So we're talking about finding good instructors, creating good games.
Absolutely.
And you know, the other thing I noticed in the games, there isn't any movement particularly except little flashes on the screen. So that makes a difference too. Well, the most persistent sound that reverberates through history is often the beating of war drums. So we're going to beat those drums, but I have to say that lest we forget, I want to quote to you, "In Flanders fields the poppies grow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky that lurks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below." So we always have to remember that in war is not always good things, and we need to consider those as well. Thank you for being with us. Jim Lunsford, thank you. And may your future be filled with interesting war games.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, and I hope to see you again soon. It's our community, you know.